Have you ever wondered what it would truly feel like to spend nearly every day standing beside a roaring fire, long before sunrise and long after sunset, shaping glowing iron with little more than strength, patience, and years of practice? When most people picture a medieval blacksmith, they imagine heroic swords, gleaming armor, or perhaps a legendary weapon destined for a king. It is an image filled with sparks, craftsmanship, and quiet admiration. But that image leaves out almost everything. For every sword that entered a castle, there were thousands of horseshoes fitted to tired horses, countless nails hammered for new homes, broken plows repaired after difficult harvests, bent hinges straightened, cracked cooking pots mended, and simple tools forged for ordinary people whose names have long since faded from history. A medieval blacksmith was among the most respected people in the village, but also among the hardest working. Their workshop never stayed clean, their hands rarely healed completely. Their clothes carried the smell of charcoal wherever they went. The heat of the forge became so familiar that cool air could almost feel unusual. Tonight, we are not following a knight into battle or a king into his palace. Instead, we are stepping quietly into a small village somewhere in medieval Europe, where the day's first faint light has not yet reached the rooftops. The fire has almost gone out. The bellows rest in silence. Work is about to begin once again, so settle comfortably beneath your blankets. Let your breathing become slow and easy, and together we'll spend the next few peaceful hours discovering what life was really like for one of the medieval world's most essential craftsmen. The village still sleeps beneath a sky scattered with fading stars. A thin mist hangs low over narrow paths, softening the outlines of timber-framed houses and gently blurring the small vegetable gardens behind them. Overnight rain has left the ground dark and damp, and each footstep would sink slightly into the packed earth if anyone were awake to make one. But almost no one is, only a rooster somewhere beyond the churchyard has begun to announce the coming morning, its call carrying softly across fields still wrapped in cool darkness. The forge stands near the edge of the village. It is not the largest building, nor the grandest. Its walls are built from sturdy timber resting upon low stone foundations, blackened by years of smoke escaping through the roof. The wide doorway remains open more often than closed, allowing fresh air to feed the fire and customers to step inside without ceremony, even in silence. The building seems different from every other workshop. It smells of charcoal long after the flames have faded. Iron dust settles into every crack in the floor. The heavy anvil sits at the center of the room like an old companion, its smooth face polished by countless years of hammer blows. Nearby, rows of hammers hang from wooden pegs, each shaped for a different purpose. Long tongs wait patiently beside them, while chisels, punches, files, and swages rest neatly where experienced hands can find them. Without needing to look, nothing here is decorative. Everything has earned its place. A faint ribbon of smoke still rises from yesterday's ashes, deep beneath the gray surface. Tiny pockets of warmth remain hidden among the charcoal. The blacksmith knows this without touching them. After years beside the forge, reading a dying fire becomes as natural as reading the changing weather. Outside, dawn slowly gathers. Inside, the day begins with familiar rituals, repeated thousands of times over the course of a lifetime. Fresh charcoal is carried from a nearby shed, each basket surprisingly heavy despite its appearance. It leaves black fingerprints across rough hands and dusts the leather apron waiting nearby. A bucket of water is checked and refilled from the village well. Every tool is quietly inspected before the first customer arrives. Because once the work begins, there will be little time to search for misplaced equipment. Small preparations rarely appear in paintings. No traveling bard sings about them, yet they are as essential to the blacksmith's craft as the hammer itself. The forge must be awakened carefully. Few pieces of dry kindling are arranged beneath yesterday's coals. A spark catches. Thin curls of smoke twist upward before disappearing into the rafters. Slowly, almost reluctantly, orange light begins to spread, made from thick leather stretched across sturdy wooden boards. Breathe life into the growing fire. One steady pull. A gentle push, again, each movement feeds fresh air into the heart of the forge. The glow brightens. Orange becomes yellow. Yellow edges toward brilliant white at the center. The warmth spreads across the workshop. Long before the sun reaches the doorway, soon familiar sounds return. The quiet hiss of settling charcoal, the creak of old leather, the occasional crack as hidden moisture escapes from the fuel. For a few precious moments, this is the calmest part of the entire day. No customers, yet no waiting repairs, no urgent requests from anxious farmers, only one craftsman and a slowly awakening fire. It is a peaceful beginning to a life that is anything but easy, because although the blacksmith enjoys respect throughout the village, respect alone cannot soften endless labor. The forge demands constancy. Iron cannot wait because someone feels tired. A broken plow cannot remain broken during planting season. A horse missing a shoe cannot simply be ignored. The village depends upon this workshop more than most people ever stop to consider. Without the blacksmith, carts remain broken, fields cannot be worked efficiently, doors lose their hinges, cooking fires lack proper tools. Even the church depends upon iron nails. Locks and fittings quietly produced within these smoke-darkened walls. It is work that touches nearly every life, even if few people pause to think about the person who makes it possible. As the first golden light finally slips over the rooftops and reaches the forge entrance, another ordinary day quietly begins. It will look much like yesterday, much like tomorrow, and much like thousands of days before it. For the medieval blacksmith, there is comfort in that familiar rhythm, but there is also exhaustion, and before long, we will discover just how early that journey truly began, because no one simply woke up one morning and became the village blacksmith. Long before a craftsman earned the right to stand confidently beside the anvil, there were years spent watching, listening, carrying, cleaning, and learning. That story begins not with a hammer, but with a child stepping cautiously into a forge for the very first time. The first lesson a future blacksmith learned had nothing to do with iron. It began with watching. Imagine yourself still quite young, perhaps no older than 10 or 12, standing hesitantly in the doorway of the forge. The morning air behind you is cool and fresh, but inside, the warmth of yesterday's fire lingers in the timbers. Smoke curls lazily toward the opening in the roof, carrying with it the familiar scent of charcoal that seems to soak into every beam, every tool, and every piece of clothing. The workshop feels enormous, not because it is especially large, but because every object inside appears purposeful and slightly intimidating. Hammers of many sizes hang neatly from pegs along the wall. Thick iron tongs rest beside the anvil. Buckets of water wait in quiet corners. Even the floor tells stories, worn smooth by generations of boots and scattered with tiny flakes of iron that catch the morning light like dull gray stars. The master blacksmith notices you almost immediately. He does not greet you with a grand speech. There is no dramatic welcome. Instead, he nods once, points toward a stack of charcoal baskets, and quietly tells you where to begin. That is often how apprenticeships started. No ceremony, only work. In medieval Europe, becoming a skilled craftsman required years of patience. Whether your father was a farmer, a carpenter, a cooper, or even another blacksmith, learning a respected trade offered something valuable: stability. Skilled artisans rarely became wealthy, but they possessed knowledge that every community depended upon. A blacksmith's knowledge was especially precious because iron touched nearly every part of daily life. The village baker needed oven, tools. Farmers depended upon strong plowshares. The mill required iron fittings. Hunters needed arrowheads. Carpenters relied on nails and chisels. Travelers expected horseshoes. Even monasteries required locks, hinges, candlesticks, and countless small metal objects that quietly served their purpose without drawing attention. Someone had to make all of them, and before someone could make them, someone had to spend years learning how. For the apprentice, those first months could seem disappointingly ordinary. You might have imagined shaping glowing swords beneath showers of brilliant sparks. Instead, you sweep floors, you carry water, you fetch charcoal, you stack firewood, you organize scrap iron into neat piles according to size and quality. Again and again, day after day. These tasks may sound dull, yet they served an important purpose. The workshop itself was constantly changing. Tools moved from bench to anvil, from anvil to quenching trough, from trough back to storage. A misplaced hammer could interrupt work at the worst possible moment. Wet charcoal burned poorly. Dry timber caught fire too easily if left too close to the forge. Before learning to shape iron, an apprentice first learned to care for the place where iron was shaped. As the weeks passed, the forge slowly became less mysterious. The names of tools settled comfortably in your memory. The cross-peen hammer, the straight-peen hammer. The fuller, the hardy chisel, the swage, the punch. Each had its own purpose, and confusing one for another invited a patient correction from the master. Sometimes only a raised eyebrow was needed. Good apprentices learned quickly that careful observation earned more praise than hurried enthusiasm. One of the most exhausting jobs belonged almost entirely to the apprentice, working the bellows. at first glance. The bellows looked simple enough. Two broad wooden boards were joined by thick leather, forming a giant pair of lungs for the forge. Yet operating them well required far more than strength. Too little air and the fire cooled too much, and valuable charcoal burned away unnecessarily while sparks scattered across the workshop floor. The apprentice soon discovered that the forge had its own rhythm. Pull, push, pause, pull, push, pause. Motion became almost musical. The leather creaked softly with every stroke, while hidden embers answered with a brighter glow. After several hours, shoulders began to ache. Arms grew heavy. Hands developed blisters that slowly hardened into calluses. No one complained much about sore muscles. They were simply part of learning. During these quiet hours, beside the bellows, the apprentice watched everything: how the master judged the color of hot iron, how quickly he moved once metal left the fire, how each hammer strike seemed deliberate rather than forceful to an inexperienced eye. The hammering appeared almost effortless. In reality, every blow reflected years of practice. Experienced blacksmiths rarely struck harder than necessary. Instead, they struck accurately. They knew exactly where the metal needed to move. The apprentice often wondered how such confidence was possible. The answer came slowly, not through explanations. Repetition. Medieval education was different from many classrooms today. Books were expensive. Written instructions were uncommon. Knowledge lived inside people. It passed from one generation to another through demonstration, imitation, correction, and endless practice. A master might explain a technique only briefly. Then he expected the apprentice to watch carefully. Tomorrow, the lesson would happen again and again, and perhaps 50 more times before attempting it alone. This way of learning demanded patience from both teacher and student. Mistakes were expected. Carelessness was not, as months became years. Responsibilities gradually increased. One morning, the master finally handed the apprentice a pair of tongs, not to forge a sword, not even a knife, only to hold a simple piece of heated iron steady while he worked. It may have seemed like a small task, yet it represented trust. Hot iron does not wait politely. Once removed from the fire, every second matters. The bright orange glow begins fading almost immediately. Heat escapes into the cool workshop air. The metal grows steadily harder beneath the hammer. The apprentice quickly learns another important lesson: timing. Everything depends upon timing. Too soon, and the metal remains stubborn. Too late, and it cools beyond usefulness. Watching an experienced smith at work resembles watching an accomplished musician. Every movement flows naturally into the next. Fire, anvil, hammer, fire, again. Water, inspection, back to the fire. Nothing feels rushed, nothing feels wasted. Outside, village life continues almost unnoticed. Children chase chickens through muddy lanes. Women hang damp linen in the morning breeze. Farmers guide oxen toward nearby fields. Merchants prepare carts for market. Yet inside the forge, time seems to follow its own steady rhythm, measured not by church bells alone, but by the changing colors of heated iron. Orange, yellow, almost white dot, then slowly fading back toward red. The apprentice learns to read those colors long before understanding all their meaning. Perhaps the most difficult lesson of all is accepting that mastery cannot be hurried. Every apprentice dreams of becoming the craftsman whose work earns admiration across the countryside, but dreams alone produce nothing. Only thousands upon thousands of ordinary days, the same floor swept each morning, the same charcoal carried, the same bellows worked, the same tools cleaned before sunset. There are no shortcuts hidden within the forge. The iron does not care how eager you are. It responds only to knowledge, skill, and patience. Years pass almost unnoticed. The child who first entered the workshop now stands taller. Hands once smooth have become rough and darkened. Tiny pale scars cross the fingers where sparks landed a little too close. The smell of charcoal no longer seems unusual. It has become the smell of daily life. Perhaps, on a quiet afternoon, the master finally steps back from the anvil. He gestures toward a glowing length of iron resting in the fire. Without many words, he invites the apprentice forward. The hammer feels heavier than expected. The workshop grows strangely quiet. Even the familiar crackle of the forge seems softer. Carefully, the apprentice grips the tongs, lifts the orange metal onto the anvil, and raises the hammer. The first strike rings through the workshop with a bright, clear note, not perfect, not elegant, but real. It marks the beginning of something that has taken years to reach. And it also marks the beginning of decades of labor still to come. Because learning to swing the hammer is only the first step. Soon, the forge will awaken before dawn once more. Customers will begin arriving with broken tools and urgent requests. And the endless work of keeping an entire village running will truly begin. The apprenticeship is nearly over. The life of a blacksmith is only just beginning. Long before the village becomes busy, before market stalls are assembled, and before the first church bell calls people to morning prayers, one building is already awake, the forge. Its work cannot wait for the comfort of daylight. If you were to walk quietly along the narrow dirt lane at this early hour, you might notice that almost every window remains dark. The baker's oven has only just begun to warm. Farmhouses are silent except for the occasional rustle of livestock shifting in their stalls. A thin veil of mist drifts lazily across the fields, softening fences, hedgerows, and distant trees until they appear almost like faded paintings. The air carries a cool freshness that exists only for a short time each morning. Soon, the sun will warm the earth. Soon, people will fill the roads. But for these few quiet moments, the village belongs to silence. The blacksmith has already been awake for some time. There is no alarm clock, of course. Life follows rhythms older than mechanical timepieces. The changing seasons, the length of daylight, the habits of animals, and the distant ringing of church bells all help shape the beginning of each day. During the long days of summer, work may begin while the eastern sky is only beginning to brighten in winter. When darkness lingers well into the morning, the forge often glows before the sun ever appears. Stepping outside, the blacksmith pauses for a moment. The cool air feels surprisingly pleasant against skin that will soon spend hours beside intense heat. Moisture clings to the grass. Somewhere nearby, A cow lets out a low, sleepy call. Chickens scratch quietly beneath wooden fences, searching for the first insects of the day. The village feels peaceful, almost untouched. It is perhaps the calmest moment the blacksmith will experience before evening. The walk to the workshop is never very long. Many medieval craftsmen lived either beside or directly above their place of work. This arrangement saved valuable time and allowed expensive tools to remain close at hand. A forge represented years of investment. The anvil alone could weigh hundreds of pounds and might serve several generations of the same family if properly cared for. As the heavy wooden door swings open, yesterday greets the blacksmith, not in words, in smells, charcoal, ash, warm iron, old smoke trapped within timber beams, leather, a faint trace of oil used to protect tools from rust. Unlike fresh wood or clean linen, these scents never entirely disappear. They weave themselves into the building over decades until the workshop possesses an unmistakable character of its own. The forge itself appears almost asleep. Yesterday's fire has collapsed into a bed of pale gray ash. Yet appearances can be misleading. Beneath that quiet surface, tiny pockets of orange warmth often survive through the night, carefully protected by the blanket of ash above them. Finding those hidden embers is both practical and satisfying. If enough heat remains, the morning fire can be coaxed back to life rather than started from nothing. The blacksmith kneels beside the hearth. A small iron poker gently moves aside. Loose ash a faint orange glow, small, steady, still alive. A handful of dry charcoal is placed carefully above it. Then another. Nothing dramatic happens. No sudden burst of flames. Only patience. The bellows stand nearby, waiting. Their thick leather has darkened with age, polished smooth by thousands upon thousands of hands. The wooden handles feel familiar. Beneath weathered fingers, the first pull is gentle. Air slips quietly into the leather chamber. Then comes the push. A soft breath enters the heart of the fire. The tiny ember brightens. Another stroke, then another. The glow slowly expands, like dawn spreading across the horizon. Soon, small flames begin licking through the charcoal. The forge has awakened. This process happens every working day, perhaps 6 days each week, year after year. For decades, it is not exciting. It is simply necessary. As the fire strengthens, the workshop slowly changes. Dark corners become visible. Metal tools catch flickers of orange light. The polished face of the anvil reflects the growing flames like still water reflecting sunrise. Outside, birds have begun their own morning conversations. Inside, another sound joins them. The steady breathing of the bellows. There is something almost comforting about its rhythm. Draw, push, draw, push, not hurried, not forced, almost like slow breathing during peaceful sleep. The forge seems to inhale and exhale alongside its keeper before any customer arrives. There is much to prepare. Yesterday's unfinished work waits patiently upon wooden benches. Perhaps a plowshare requiring one final sharpening. Several horseshoes, already shaped but still needing nail holes. A cracked hinge promised to the village miller. A bundle of iron rods ordered by a carpenter. Building a new barn. Nothing has moved during the night. Yet everything silently reminds the blacksmith that today's labor has already begun. Tools are inspected one by one. A loose hammerhead could become dangerous. Tongs must grip securely. Files need cleaning. Chisels require sharpening. Unlike modern factories with replacement equipment close at hand, medieval craftsmen depended heavily upon maintaining every tool they owned. A well-cared-for hammer might outlive its original owner nearby. Buckets are checked. One contains clean water for quenching hot iron. Another may hold water for washing hands or cooling minor burns. Water serves countless purposes inside the forge, and it must always remain close. The apprentice, if one lives in the household, usually arrives soon afterward. He enters quietly, knowing better than to disturb the master's concentration during these first peaceful moments without needing instructions. He begins familiar tasks. Sweep yesterday's iron scale from around the anvil. Gather fresh charcoal. Refill water buckets. Stack finished pieces neatly. Collect scrap iron into separate piles. Small fragments should never be wasted. Iron is valuable, even the smallest. Offcuts may become tomorrow's nails or rivets. Nothing useful leaves the workshop unnecessarily. As the morning progresses, the smell of burning charcoal grows richer. It is unlike the scent of ordinary firewood burning in household fireplaces. Charcoal burns hotter, cleaner. Its smoke is thinner, less fragrant than oak or beech logs, yet instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with metalworking. The warmth spreads steadily throughout the workshop during winter. This heat offers welcome relief from freezing mornings. During summer, it becomes an almost constant burden. The blacksmith hardly notices anymore, or perhaps he notices every day, but has long since accepted it. Acceptance is an important part of this life. There will always be smoke, always soot, always ash settling upon clothing, no matter how often it is brushed away. By midday, fresh black dust will already coat the sleeves again. Some things simply cannot be avoided outside. Daylight now reaches across the village. Sunlight catches droplets of dew resting upon rooftops made from thatch or wooden shingles. A shepherd opens his gate. Farmers begin leading oxen toward distant fields. Children carrying small baskets hurry toward the well before breakfast. Life gradually unfolds. The forge, however, has been awake long enough that its first tasks are already underway. The blacksmith selects a length of plain iron bar. Nothing remarkable, no elaborate design. Today's first project is simple. Several dozen nails. It is difficult to imagine medieval life without nails. They hold together roofs, furniture, wagons, doors, fences, barrels, bridges, and countless other objects. Every growing village consumes enormous numbers of them each year. Yet each nail must be forged individually, one at a time. The iron enters the fire. Its dull gray surface slowly changes, first dark red dot, then cherry red, then bright orange. The color tells the blacksmith almost everything needed. No thermometer hangs upon the wall. The fire itself speaks through light. When the moment feels right, the bar is lifted smoothly onto the anvil. The first hammer strike echoes through the quiet. Morning dot, clear dot, sharp dot, confident. It carries farther than one might expect. Across the nearby lane, a passing farmer hears it. He smiles faintly. The blacksmith is working good. His broken plow can probably be repaired. Today, soon, another hammer strike follows, then another. not chaotic, not furious, measured, almost rhythmic. Each blow accomplishes something specific. A point is drawn, a head is formed, the nail is cut free, another begins. Within the workshop, time now becomes marked less by church bells than by repetition. Heat, hammer, turn, strike, tut, put back to the fire. Again, again to an outsider. It might appear monotonous, to the blacksmith. It is simply the language of work. There is satisfaction in repetition when each movement has purpose. Outside, footsteps begin passing more frequently. A cart rattles slowly over uneven ground. A woman carrying fresh bread nods politely through the open doorway. Two children pause briefly to watch tiny sparks leap from the anvil before being gently called onward. The village has fully wakened. It is no longer only the blacksmith and the fire. The first customer soon appears, not a nobleman, not a knight seeking a magnificent sword, simply an elderly farmer, carrying a worn iron hoe whose edge has become rounded after months of turning. Stubborn soil, he removes his cap, offers a quiet greeting, sets the tool upon the workbench. No lengthy explanation is needed. Both men understand why he has come. This quiet exchange repeats countless times throughout the year. One customer leaves, another arrives, a shepherd with a broken hook, a cooper needing barrel hoops, a carpenter requiring fresh chisels, a widow asking whether an old cooking pot might be repaired instead of replaced. The forge is more than a workshop. It is part repair shop, part meeting place, part quiet center of village life. By now, the village is fully awake. Smoke rises gently from nearly every chimney, drifting upward into the cool morning air before disappearing into the brightening sky. The baker's shelves have begun to empty as families collect warm loaves for breakfast. Farmers are already scattered across the fields beyond the village, where the first hours of daylight are often the most valuable. Merchants are arranging their goods, children have been sent on errands, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell quietly marks another passing hour. Inside the forge, however, time feels different. The day is not measured by bells. It is measured by pieces of iron, one completed, another begun, another waiting beside the anvil. If someone from our own time were somehow able to visit this workshop, they might be surprised by what they did not see. There are no magnificent swords lined along the walls, no shining suits of armor waiting to be collected by noble knights. No secret masterpieces hidden beneath cloth. Instead, the workshop is filled with objects so ordinary that they almost disappear into the background. A pile of horseshoes, bundles of nails, door hinges, simple knives, iron, hooks, chains, pokers, pot hangers, latches, hoop, irons for barrels, plowshares, awaiting repair, cart, fittings, garden tools. These humble objects are the true heart of the blacksmith's trade. History often remembers spectacular weapons because they appear in stories and museums. Daily life remembered something much simpler. It remembered the craftsman who could repair what had broken yesterday so that tomorrow could continue as planned. The medieval world depended upon maintenance. Almost everything wore out, wood cracked, leather stretched, stone chipped, iron bent. Nothing lasted forever. And because replacing an object entirely was often expensive, repairing it became an essential skill. The blacksmith spent as much time restoring old tools as creating new ones. This practical reality shaped nearly every working day. A farmer enters, carrying a plowshare. Its one sharp edge has become rounded after weeks of cutting stubborn earth filled with hidden stones. Every acre has slowly worn away tiny particles of iron until the tool no longer slices cleanly through the soil without repair. Planting becomes slower. Harvests suffer. A single dull plow may affect an entire family's food supply. The blacksmith studies the worn edge quietly. He does not rush. Experience has taught him that every piece of iron tells a story if examined carefully. Small cracks reveal where stress has accumulated. The uneven wear shows how the tool was used. Even the color of the metal hints at its quality. Satisfied, he nods gently. It can be repaired. The plow enters the fire as it heats. Another customer steps through the doorway. This time, it is a carpenter. He places several chisels upon the workbench. Their cutting edges have become nicked after shaping heavy oak beams for a new house. Sharp tools are safer than dull ones. A keen edge requires less force. Less force means greater control. Greater control means fewer accidents, the blacksmith adds. The chisels to today's growing line of waiting work. Almost immediately, another visitor appears. An elderly woman carries a small iron cooking pot. Its handle has loosened after years, suspended above open flames. Replacing the pot would cost more than repairing it. She asks politely whether it can be fixed. The answer, thankfully, is yes. The workshop rarely stays empty for long. People arrive one after another, each carrying a problem made from iron, each hoping to leave with a solution. Unlike many modern businesses, appointments are uncommon. Life happens unexpectedly. A broken axle cannot wait until next Tuesday. A horse losing its shoe during harvest season creates immediate difficulty. The forge must remain flexible because the village itself is unpredictable. This constant variety keeps the work interesting, but it also creates endless demands. There is always another repair, always another request, always another piece of glowing metal waiting beside the fire. Perhaps the most famous product made by village blacksmiths was the horseshoe. Today, it has become almost symbolic of the profession. Yet many people never stop to consider how much care went into creating one. No two horses possess exactly the same feet. Each shoe requires small adjustments. Each nail hole must be carefully positioned. The iron must be heated evenly, bent gradually, checked repeatedly against the animal's hoof, and adjusted again if necessary. Fitting a horse is not simply attaching metal. It is understanding the animal itself. An experienced blacksmith watches how the horse stands, how it shifts its weight, whether one hoof wears differently from another, whether an old injury has changed its gait. Good horseshoeing protects both the animal and its owner. Poor work may leave the horse lame, and a lame horse affects travel, farming, trade, and nearly every other aspect of medieval life in many villages. This responsibility alone ensured the blacksmith remained constantly occupied. Not every customer brings urgent work. Some simply need supplies. Bundles of nails are especially common. Modern factories produce thousands every minute. The medieval blacksmith creates them individually. The process is surprisingly elegant. A heated rod is drawn thinner beneath the hammer. One end is shaped into a point. The opposite end forms a small head. The finished nail is cut away. The remaining rod returns to the fire. Then everything begins again. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. Heat, strike, turn, strike, turn, strike, taut, shape, taut, repeat. There are no shortcuts. Every nail receives the same careful attention. By the end of a long day, hundreds may lie cooling upon the workbench. Individually, they seem insignificant. Together, they hold an entire village. Together, roofs, doors, barns, bridges, furniture, everywhere. One looks, tiny pieces of forged iron quietly perform their duties without recognition. It is curious how often history celebrates kings while forgetting the humble nails that held their castles together. As the morning passes into afternoon, larger projects occasionally appear. A wagon axle requiring reinforcement, heavy chains for securing livestock, iron tires that fit around wooden wheels. Contrary to modern automobile tires, these are broad iron bands, heated until they expand, then carefully fitted around wooden wheels before cooling and shrinking tightly into place. The process demands speed and coordination. Several people may help position the glowing iron before buckets of water hissed dramatically against the hot metal. Steam rises, the wheel settles, the wooden spokes become tightly compressed, the entire assembly grows stronger. It is impressive work. Yet even this task repeats many times throughout the year. Extraordinary moments eventually become ordinary through repetition. The same can be said of knives. Nearly every household owns at least one. Some families possess several. Unlike ceremonial weapons, household knives experience constant daily use. Preparing vegetables, cutting bread, cleaning fish, shaping leather, whittling wood, their edges gradually wear away. The blacksmith sharpens them patiently, restoring usefulness to objects that might otherwise be discarded. Waste is something medieval communities try very hard to avoid. Iron remains expensive. Mining it requires tremendous effort. Smelting demands enormous quantities of charcoal. Transporting raw materials is slow. Every fragment has value. Broken tools rarely become rubbish. Instead, they become tomorrow's raw material. The apprentice learns this lesson early. Nothing leaves the workshop unless absolutely useless. Old hinges may become nails. Bent bars become hooks. Worn horseshoes become small brackets. Scrap disappears, piece by piece, into new creations. The forge practices recycling centuries before the word itself exists. The afternoon grows warmer. Sunlight pours through the open doorway, illuminating tiny particles floating gently in the smoky air outside. Insects hum among nearby grasses. Inside, the fire continues glowing with unwavering determination. Its appetite never seems satisfied. Fresh charcoal disappears steadily throughout the day. Keeping the forge supplied becomes almost a job in itself. Without charcoal, everything stops. The blacksmith understands this better than anyone. He also understands something else. Few people outside the workshop truly appreciate how physically demanding this repetition becomes. Each hammer blow requires controlled force, not wild strength. Controlled strength, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. The body slowly adapts. Shoulders broaden, forearms strengthen, hands become thick with calluses. Yet, Even strong muscles grow tired. The hammer never becomes weightless, only familiar by late afternoon. Small signs of fatigue appear almost unnoticed. The blacksmith stretches his back briefly while waiting for iron to heat. The apprentice quietly refills the water bucket without being asked. Both know there are still several customers waiting before evening arrives. No one complains. Complaining changes nothing. The work simply continues. One fascinating aspect of the profession is how invisible success often becomes when a plow works perfectly. Few people think about who repaired it. When a gate swings smoothly upon sturdy hinges, attention remains upon the gate itself. When horses travel safely because their shoes fit correctly, the blacksmith receives little public praise. His greatest achievements often pass unnoticed precisely because they function exactly as intended. There is quiet satisfaction in that. The forge exists not to attract admiration but to solve problems, and every solved problem allows someone else's day to continue. Perhaps that explains why medieval villages respected their blacksmiths so deeply. Not because they forged legendary weapons, but because they quietly removed countless obstacles from ordinary life. As evening slowly approaches, finished work begins forming neat rows across the workshop. By the time the afternoon sun reaches its highest point, the warmth outside the forge has become noticeable. Inside, however, it has become something else entirely. The blacksmith no longer works beside a fire. He works within its world. There are moments during winter when stepping through the forge door feels wonderfully comforting. Frost clings to rooftops, the ground crunches beneath frozen boots, and each breath forms a small white cloud in the cold morning air. Villagers entering the workshop instinctively stretch their hands toward the warmth, grateful for a brief escape from the biting wind. But they only remain for a few minutes. The blacksmith remains there all day. That difference changes everything. Stand beside a forge for a moment, and it feels pleasant. Stand beside it for 12 hours, 6 days a week, year after year, and warmth becomes something entirely different. It becomes constant. It becomes inescapable. It becomes part of your life. The fire itself is unlike an ordinary household hearth. A cooking fire is designed to simmer gently. The forge must do something much more demanding. It must heat iron until it becomes soft enough to shape beneath the hammer. That requires extraordinary temperatures. Charcoal burns hotter than ordinary firewood, and when the bellows feed fresh air into its glowing heart, the center of the fire shines with an almost dazzling brightness. The blacksmith rarely stares directly into it, not because it is beautiful, because it is difficult to look at for long. The eyes gradually learn to judge heat by color: dark red dot, cherry red dot, bright orange dot, yellow, nearly white. Each shade tells the craftsman something important to cool, and the iron refuses to move. Too hot, and valuable metal may become damaged. Learning these colors takes years. Trusting them takes even longer. The heat reaches far beyond the fire itself. It radiates from the anvil. After repeated use, it rises from freshly forged tools. It lingers in the walls, in the roof beams, and even in the packed earth beneath the blacksmith's feet. By midday, sweat has long since soaked through the linen shirt worn beneath the heavy leather apron. There is no relief, only brief pauses. while another piece of iron warms inside the forge. The apprentice experiences this reality quickly. On cool spring mornings, the workshop may feel inviting. By afternoon, the same apprentice finds sweat running into tired eyes, sleeves sticking to aching arms, and the simple act of lifting another hammer becoming steadily more difficult. The master notices. He remembers feeling exactly the same many years before. Yet he says very little, not from unkindness, simply because every blacksmith must become accustomed to the forge through experience rather than explanation. The body adapts, slowly, almost quietly, after years spent near the fire. The blacksmith develops habits without consciously thinking about them. He turns his face slightly away when opening the hottest part of the forge. He wipes sweat with the back of his wrist rather than dusty hands. He instinctively chooses where to stand, so the rising heat is just a little less overwhelming. These small adjustments seem insignificant. Together, they make long days possible. Heat is only one companion inside the workshop. Smoke is another. Although charcoal produces less smoke than fresh wood, it never disappears completely. Tiny wisps drift upward throughout the day, escaping through openings in the roof whenever the wind allows. On calm days, however, some of that smoke lingers inside. It curls gently beneath the rafters. It settles into clothing. It leaves a faint taste in the air. The workshop never smells fresh in the way a meadow or forest does. Instead, it possesses its own unmistakable atmosphere. Warm charcoal, hot iron, leather, ash, a trace of oil, perhaps, a hint of damp timber after recent rain. Visitors notice these smells. Immediately, the blacksmith hardly notices them at all. When surrounded by the same scents every day for decades, they simply become normal. The same is true of soot. No matter how carefully one works, fine black dust slowly settles everywhere. It gathers upon windowsills, it clings to aprons, it hides beneath fingernails. Even after washing, tiny dark traces often remain in the lines of the skin. Many medieval craftsmen could almost be recognized by their hands alone. A blacksmith's hands told their own story. Broad palms, thick fingers, old scars crossing the knuckles, calluses polished smooth by years gripping wooden hammer handles. These were not signs of carelessness. They were signs of experience. Every scar carried a forgotten memory, a spark landing unexpectedly, a sharp edge encountered too quickly, a careless apprentice brushing past with hot tongs. Most injuries were small, minor. Burns happened often enough that they became almost expected. The blacksmith learned to react calmly. A brief hiss as hot skin met cool water, a quiet nod, then back to work. There was little drama in these moments, simply acceptance. The forge demanded attention, not perfection. The greatest danger was rarely the dramatic burst of sparks that artists love to paint. It was distraction. Iron changes quickly. One moment it is ready, the next it has cooled too much, or perhaps become hotter than intended. The blacksmith's concentration rarely wandered far from the glowing metal before him. Conversation continued. Customers came and went. Children peeked through the doorway. Dogs wandered lazily across the floor, searching for cooler places to rest. Yet the craftsman's eyes always returned to the fire. Its changing colors guided every decision. Then there was the sound. Many imagine the forge as deafening. Surprisingly, it was often a place of changing rhythms rather than constant noise. There were bursts of energetic hammering, followed by quiet moments while iron reheated. During those pauses, another collection of sounds emerged. The gentle breathing of the bellows, the soft crackle of charcoal settling, the faint hiss of warm metal meeting damp air, boots shifting across the floor, customers speaking in low voices outside. Birds continued singing, almost unaware of the work unfolding inside. Then the hammer began again. 1 strike, 2.3.a. Pause. Another series. Unlike frantic pounding, experienced blacksmiths rarely struck without purpose. Every blow had a destination. Every movement sought a specific shape. Watching a master at work was almost like watching someone dance with heavy tools. Effort existed, certainly, but unnecessary movement disappeared through years of practice. This efficiency mattered not because it saved time, because wasted energy accumulated over the course of a lifetime. A single careless swing meant little. 10,000 careless swings meant exhaustion. One reason older blacksmiths often remained surprisingly capable was that they learned economy of movement. They allowed knowledge to replace brute strength whenever possible. Even so, fatigue remained unavoidable. Shoulders carried much of the burden. The repeated lifting of hammers gradually strengthened muscles while also wearing down joints. Backs stiffened after long hours, leaning over the anvil. Knees protested after standing upon packed earth from dawn until dusk. There were no cushioned mats beneath their feet, no ergonomic workstations, only earthstone and habit. When evening finally approached, the body often felt heavier than it had that morning. Yet tomorrow promised much the same. Another challenge came from the changing seasons. Summer transformed the forge into an oven. Outside temperatures climbed steadily beneath the afternoon sun. Inside, the fire continued burning just as fiercely as always. Windows and doors remained open whenever possible, inviting whatever breeze happened to pass. Sometimes it helped. Sometimes the air outside felt almost as warm as the air within. Winter created a curious contrast. The front of the body remained warm from the forge. The back often stayed cold whenever icy drafts slipped through gaps in the timber walls. It was entirely possible for one hand to feel comfortably warm while the other felt chilled. The blacksmith grew accustomed to these strange contradictions. They simply belonged to the profession. Clothing reflected this practical reality. Linen shirts absorbed sweat well and could be washed repeatedly. Heavy leather aprons protected against sparks and minor burns. Wool provided warmth during colder months but became uncomfortable near the hottest parts of the fire. No garment offered perfect comfort. The craftsmen dressed according to necessity rather than fashion. Visitors rarely cared whether an apron was stained. A spotless apron might even inspire suspicion. For a blacksmith, clean clothing often suggested little work had been done. As daylight slowly softened toward evening, sunlight entering through the doorway turned golden. The bright glare of midday faded. The forge fire seemed even more vivid. Against the lengthening shadows, sparks occasionally drifted upward like tiny stars before disappearing into darkness beneath the roof. There was beauty here, not the polished beauty of a royal palace, not the elegance of stained glass in a cathedral. Instead, It was the beauty of honest labor, of skill practiced patiently, of generations passing knowledge from one pair of hands to another. The forge demanded much from those who worked within it. It asked for strength, patience, attention, endurance in return. It offered something difficult to describe, a quiet satisfaction, the simple knowledge that nearly every household in the village depended, in some small way, upon work completed beside this very fire. Even after the forge had cooled for the night, the skin seemed to remember the day's heat. The hands continued to ache faintly while lifting a wooden bowl at supper. Tomorrow morning, before dawn, the fire would wait once more, patient, silent, ready to be awakened again. For the forge never truly rested. It merely paused between one day's labor and the next, and neither, in many ways, did the life of the medieval blacksmith. As another morning settles over the village, the forge door remains open, not simply because the fire needs fresh air, but because people are always arriving. If there is one place where nearly every resident will eventually visit, it is the blacksmith's workshop. The church may gather everyone once each week. The marketplace may fill on certain days, but the forge welcomes a steady procession throughout the year, one ordinary need at a time. Few villagers stop to think about how much of their daily lives depends upon iron. Like the air they breathe or the paths they walk, its presence is so familiar that it often goes unnoticed. Yet, if the blacksmith were suddenly to disappear for only a few weeks, the entire rhythm of the village would begin to change, not all at once. Slowly, quietly, almost imperceptibly, a loose hinge would remain loose, a cracked plow would stay broken, a horse missing a shoe would limp a little farther each day. Small inconveniences would gather until they became larger problems. It is often said that history is shaped by kings and armies. There is some truth in that, but everyday life is shaped by quieter people, people whose names rarely appear in chronicles, people who solve ordinary problems before they become extraordinary ones. The village blacksmith is one of those people. From sunrise until evening, the workshop welcomes a remarkable variety of visitors. Each carries something different. Each leaves with renewed hope that tomorrow's work will be easier than today's. The first customer this morning is a farmer. His boots are already coated with damp soil from inspecting his fields before breakfast. He removes a broad-brimmed hat, nods politely, and places a worn sickle upon the workbench. Its curved blade has become dull after weeks of harvesting grain. Without a sharp edge, every swing demands more effort. More effort means greater fatigue. Greater fatigue means fewer rows harvested before sunset. The blacksmith understands this immediately. A sharpened sickle is not merely a better tool. It is extra time, extra strength, perhaps even extra food stored for winter. The farmer need say very little. Both men already understand what must be done. Soon another familiar figure appears, the village carpenter. Unlike the farmer, whose tools spend their days cutting earth and crops, the carpenter depends upon precision. His chisels must bite cleanly into oak. His augers must bore neat holes. His adzes must smooth rough beams before they become walls, doors, or roof frames. One damaged edge can slow an entire construction project. The carpenter sets several tools carefully upon the bench. Together, the two craftsmen examine each one with quiet concentration. They speak less than one might expect. People who work with their hands often develop an understanding that requires few words: a nod, a glance, a finger tracing a damaged edge. That is often enough. The blacksmith places the tools beside the forge. Another task joins today's growing list as morning continues. Footsteps approach once more. This time they belong to the cooper. The cooper's trade is making barrels. Barrels store almost everything important in medieval life: ale, wine, salted fish, flour, apples, honey, even drinking water during travel. Most people admire the wooden staves that form the barrel itself. Far fewer notice the iron hoops holding everything tightly together. Without those hoops, the barrel simply falls apart. The cooper needs fresh bands forged to replace older ones weakened by rust or years of hard use. The blacksmith measures carefully. Each hoop must fit precisely to loose, and the barrel leaks too tight, and the wooden staves may crack during assembly. It is another reminder that the village does not function because one trade exists alone. Every craft depends upon another. The carpenter needs nails. The cooper needs iron hoops. The farmer needs plows. The miller needs machinery repaired. The blacksmith stands quietly at the center of this web of cooperation. His work touches everyone else's. Perhaps no customer receives more careful attention than the horse owner in the medieval world. Horses are extraordinarily valuable for some families. A horse represents their greatest possession. It pulls plows, carries goods to market, transports travelers, delivers messages between towns. A healthy horse can transform weeks of exhausting labor into manageable work. A lame horse changes everything. The animal enters the yard outside the forge with slow, familiar steps. Its owner strokes its neck reassuringly, while the blacksmith kneels beside one front hoof. The inspection begins long before any hammer is lifted. He studies the hoof carefully, its shape, its wear, tiny cracks, the condition of old nail holes. Every detail matters. Contrary to popular imagination, fitting a horseshoe is not a contest of strength. It is an exercise in patience. The horse shifts slightly. The blacksmith waits. There is no reason to rush. Animals sense hurried movements. Calmness usually achieves more than force. Nearby, the apprentice prepares several shoes of different sizes. One may fit immediately, another may require adjustment. Perhaps a third proves best after careful comparison. The process resembles tailoring far more than simple metalworking. When the shoe finally fits correctly, the owner smiles with quiet relief. His journey home will be safer. His fields can still be worked. His livelihood remains secure. Before long, another visitor appears, wearing a coarse wool robe, a monk from the nearby monastery. Monasteries were often among the largest and most organized communities in medieval Europe. They copied books, cultivated gardens, brewed ale, tended orchards, offered hospitality to travelers, maintained workshops. Every one of those activities required tools. The monk carries several iron hinges removed from an old wooden gate. Years of damp weather have left them stiff and badly worn. Rather than replacing them, the monastery prefers repair. Resources must be used wisely. The blacksmith agrees. Well-made iron deserves a second life whenever possible. While the hinges warm in the forge, Conversation drifts toward practical matters. Perhaps news of this year's harvest, perhaps reports from another monastery several days away, perhaps the unusually mild weather. The forge becomes once again not only a workshop, but a quiet gathering place. Information often travels alongside broken tools. Travelers contribute their own stories. A merchant arriving from a distant market town might bring unfamiliar coins, curious rumors, or descriptions of roads washed out by heavy rain. A messenger reports repairs needed on a bridge farther along the river. A pilgrim asks whether a walking staff can receive a stronger iron tip before continuing the journey. The blacksmith listens while working. News arrives naturally. No newspaper exists, no town bulletin. Instead, information moves from person to person, carried across villages just as surely as goods carried upon wagons. By midday, children begin appearing more frequently. Some come with errands, others simply watch. The forge fascinates them. To young eyes, glowing iron seems almost magical. A dull gray bar disappears into the fire. Moments later, it emerges bright orange. The hammer falls. Tiny sparks leap into the air. Slowly, something useful begins taking shape. Many children stand quietly in the doorway, mesmerized by the transformation. The apprentice smiles. He remembers doing exactly the same years ago. Perhaps among those curious faces stands the next generation of blacksmiths, or carpenters, or wheelwrights. Every craft begins with curiosity. As afternoon settles over the village, the blacksmith's customers become increasingly varied. An innkeeper requires stronger hooks for hanging cooking pots above the kitchen fire. A shepherd brings shears needing sharpening before the coming season. A fisherman asks whether a bent hook might still be saved. A miller requests replacement pins for part of the watermill's mechanism. Even the local lord's steward occasionally arrives, not with grand ceremonial weapons, but with practical requests: locks, gate hardware, stable fittings, agricultural equipment used across the estate. The needs of noble households are often surprisingly ordinary. One lesson becomes clearer with every passing visitor. The blacksmith does not merely work for the village. He works with the village. Each profession supports another. No single craft stands alone. Without farmers, there is little food. Without carpenters, few buildings. Without coopers, little safe storage. Without millers, grain remains flourless. Without blacksmiths, all of those other trades become slower, harder, and less reliable. This interconnectedness shaped medieval communities more deeply than many modern people realize. Villages succeeded not because one person excelled. They succeeded because many different skills quietly complemented one another. The forge sits at the center of those relationships, not above them, not below them, simply among them. The blacksmith becomes familiar with nearly every family he knows, whose children have recently grown tall enough to help in the fields. He remembers which farmer lost an ox during the previous winter. He notices when an elderly customer walks more slowly than before. He hears wedding plans months before the ceremony. He learns of births, illnesses, successful harvests, and difficult seasons almost by accident. These are not conversations sought deliberately. They simply accompany daily work. While iron heats, people talk. While nails cool, stories are exchanged. The workshop becomes part of the social fabric of village life. As evening approaches, Today's final customer collects a freshly repaired lantern hook. Coins change hands. Quiet thanks are offered. The customer disappears down the lane, leaving the forge peaceful once more. For a brief moment, the blacksmith stands in the doorway. The sun hangs low above distant fields, casting long golden shadows across cottages and gardens. Children laugh somewhere near the village. Well, by the time the medieval village settles into its familiar rhythm, the roads beyond its fields are already alive with movement, not the smooth, uninterrupted movement we might know today, but something slower, measured, patient. A horse pulling a cart laden with sacks of grain, an ox dragging heavy timber from a nearby woodland, a merchant guiding two pack horses along a muddy lane, a pilgrim walking steadily with a wooden staff, children leading goats toward fresh pasture. Every journey depends upon simple things: strong wheels, reliable harnesses, sound horses, and beneath nearly all of them, somewhere hidden from casual view, the quiet work of the blacksmith. Most roads in medieval Europe would surprise modern travelers. Few are paved, many are little more than tracks worn gradually into the landscape by centuries of feet, hooves, and wheels. During summer, they become dusty ribbons stretching between villages. After heavy rain, they transform into deep channels of mud where wagon wheels sink almost to their hubs. In winter, frozen ruts turn every journey into a slow and careful balancing act. Travel itself is rarely comfortable. Even a short journey demands preparation, and every mile places strain upon equipment. Wood flexes, leather stretches, iron loosens. The blacksmith understands something every traveler eventually learns: nothing that moves remains perfect for long. One chilly autumn morning, a farmer arrives leading his oldest horse. The animal walks steadily, but not quite evenly. Its left foreleg lands with just the slightest hesitation. A careful observer notices immediately. The blacksmith notices before the horse even reaches the workshop. Years of experience have trained his eyes. He says nothing at first. Instead, he kneels beside the animal, placing one weathered hand gently against the horse's shoulder before lifting the front hoof. The horseshoe remains firmly attached, but something is wrong. One edge has worn thinner than the rest. Perhaps the horse has favored one side while pulling heavy loads. Perhaps yesterday's rocky road bent the shoe slightly. Neither problem is dramatic, left unattended. However, both will gradually become more serious. The blacksmith removes the old shoe with practiced care. Each nail comes free, one at a time. The horse stands patiently, shifting its weight only occasionally. This is familiar work for both of them. Many horses visit the forge every 6 or 8 weeks, some slightly sooner, others later. Their shoes wear differently depending upon the roads they travel, the loads they pull, and even the quality of the ground surrounding the village. Contrary to popular belief, the shoe itself is only part of the task. The hoof must also be examined, trimmed if necessary, cleaned thoroughly, balanced carefully. Healthy hooves mean healthy horses. Healthy horses mean healthy farms. Everything is connected nearby. The apprentice has already selected several unfinished horseshoes from a rack against the wall. Each resembles the next at first glance, yet subtle differences exist. Some are broader, some narrower, some heavier for large draft horses, others lighter for riding animals, even before making adjustments. Experience guides the blacksmith toward the best starting point. The chosen shoe disappears into the fire. Its dark gray surface gradually glows orange. When the color feels right, it returns to the anvil. The hammer begins its familiar rhythm. Strike, turn, strike, check, back into the fire. Again, tiny changes make remarkable differences. A few careful blows widen one branch, another strike slightly alters the curve. Soon, what began as a standard shoe now belongs to one particular horse and no other. The fitting itself requires calm patience. The blacksmith lifts the warm but not dangerously hot shoe against the trimmed hoof to check its shape. Modern demonstrations sometimes emphasize dramatic clouds of smoke during this process. In reality, medieval methods varied across regions and periods. Some smiths briefly fitted a heated shoe to reveal high spots on the hoof, while others preferred to cool the shoe first and adjust it through repeated trials. The exact practice depended on local tradition, the animal's condition, and the blacksmith's experience. What mattered most was not spectacle, it was fit. A poorly fitted shoe created discomfort. A well-fitted one allowed the horse to walk naturally for many weeks. The owner watches closely, not because he doubts the blacksmith, because the horse may represent years of careful breeding, hard work, and considerable expense. Replacing such an animal would be difficult. Protecting it is far wiser. Once satisfied, the blacksmith carefully drives fresh nails through the prepared holes. Each emerges through the outer wall of the hoof exactly where intended. The points are bent over and trimmed neatly. Nothing protrudes, nothing catches. The horse lowers its foot, takes one cautious step, then another. Its movement appears smooth once again. The owner smiles, not broadly, simply with quiet relief. One more problem solved. No sooner has the horse departed than another challenge rolls slowly into the yard. A wagon, or rather, a wagon that would much prefer not to be moving at all. One wheel leans awkwardly beneath the weight of several sacks of grain. The driver climbs down carefully, shaking his head with the resigned expression of someone who has experienced this inconvenience before. Broken wagons are remarkably common. The roads ask a great deal of them. Deep ruts twist wooden frames. Hidden stones jar every joint. Heavy loads strain axles until small weaknesses become larger fractures. Many people imagine medieval wagons as crude constructions. In truth, well-built wagons were impressive achievements of craftsmanship. Wheelwrights, carpenters, and blacksmiths all contributed. The wooden spokes must fit perfectly into the hub. The rim must remain round. Iron tires, broad metal bands fitted around the outside hold everything tightly together. If any one part fails, the entire vehicle becomes unreliable. The blacksmith begins his inspection. A loose iron tire. Fortunately, not a broken axle. That is welcome news. Repairing the iron band will require care but far less time than rebuilding the wagon itself. The wheel is removed. Several helpers assist. Large wheels are awkward rather than impossibly heavy, and working together makes the task considerably easier. The iron tire is carried toward the forge. Once again, fire becomes the solution. As the band heats, it expands ever so slightly. This simple property of metal has been understood through observation for generations. long before anyone could explain it scientifically. The blacksmith does not speak of thermal expansion. He simply knows what experience has taught him. Hot iron grows, cold iron tightens. When the tire reaches the proper temperature, it is carried quickly back to the waiting wheel. Everyone moves with practiced coordination. The glowing band settles over the wooden rim immediately. Buckets of water are poured across the iron dot. Steam rises in thick white clouds. The hiss echoes through the yard. Slowly, the iron contracts. The wheel tightens. The spokes draw firmly together. A structure that moments before felt loose and uncertain now becomes solid once again. It is an elegant demonstration of practical knowledge gained through centuries of observation. The driver examines the repaired wheel with obvious satisfaction. His journey may continue. His grain will still reach the mill before nightfall. A simple repair has preserved an entire day's work throughout the afternoon. Transportation continues arriving in many forms. A messenger requires a bent stirrup straightened. A trader asks for stronger iron rings to secure cargo upon a cart. A shepherd needs repairs to a small handcart used for carrying wool. Each request seems modest on its own. Together, they reveal an important truth. Movement is the lifeblood of medieval society. Food must travel. Timber must travel. Stone must travel. People must travel. News must travel. Without reliable transport, villages become isolated. Markets shrink. Trade slows. Communities struggle. The blacksmith quietly helps prevent all of that. Even simple nails play their part. A loose nail within a wagon wheel today may become tomorrow's broken journey. Replacing it requires only moments. Ignoring it may cost an entire harvest. Experience teaches people which choice is wiser. As the sun begins drifting lower across the sky, another familiar sound reaches the forge. The rhythmic clatter of hooves. Several riders approach together. Not knights, not soldiers, simply neighboring farmers, returning from market. One notices a loose shoe. Another mentions a cracked buckle upon his harness. A third remembers that his wagon latch has felt unreliable for several weeks. Since they are passing the forge anyway, today seems the sensible time to stop. That is another quiet advantage of the blacksmith's profession. People rarely make special journeys solely to visit him. Instead, they come naturally as life unfolds around them. The forge becomes woven into everyday routines. Its doorway remains open, not merely to customers, but to the steady flow of village life itself. As evening shadows lengthen, the workshop gradually grows quieter. The last wagon rolls away. Freshly repaired wheels turn smoothly along the uneven road. The horse, fitted with its new shoes, walks comfortably beside its owner. A shepherd's cart carries wool toward tomorrow's market. None of these travelers pause to admire the forge as they disappear beyond the hedgerows. They simply continue their journeys. That is precisely the point. The finest repair is often the one that allows people to forget there was ever a problem at all. Standing for a moment in the open doorway, the blacksmith watches the final wagon disappear into the fading light. The road stretches quietly toward the next village, winding between fields ready for harvest. Tomorrow, more travelers will appear. More horses, more wagons, more broken fittings, more loose wheels. The work will begin again. There is something curious about workshops. Long after the people who built them have disappeared, They often seem to remember the timber beams darken with smoke. The stone floors become polished by countless footsteps. The workbenches acquire small dents, scratches, and burn marks that quietly record thousands of ordinary days. If walls could tell stories, a medieval blacksmith's forge would have no shortage of them. Step through the wide wooden doorway. Once more, not as a customer this time, not as an apprentice, simply as a quiet observer. The village fades behind you almost immediately. Outside, the sounds of chickens, distant conversations, and creaking wagon wheels continue as always. Inside, another world begins. The first thing you notice is not the fire, it is the smell. Every building possesses its own scent, though those who live or work there often stop noticing it. A bakery carries the comforting fragrance of warm bread. A stable smells of hay, leather, and horses. A monastery may hold traces of beeswax, candles, and old parchment. The forge is different. Warm charcoal, dry ash, hot iron, a faint hint of linseed oil used to protect certain tools. Leather that has absorbed years of smoke. Fresh cut timber from a recently repaired workbench. Occasionally, the earthy smell of damp clay used in parts of the hearth. None of these scents compete with one another. Instead, they blend into something unmistakably familiar. Anyone approaching with closed eyes could probably identify the building before ever opening them. The workshop itself is not especially large. Contrary to many modern illustrations, most village smithies were practical rather than grand. Space was valuable. Every corner served a purpose. Near the center stands the anvil. It commands attention without asking for it. Solid, dark, patient. To the blacksmith, it is almost like an old friend. Anvils were extraordinarily valuable possessions. Some remained in use for generations, passing from father to son, master to apprentice, surviving long after the original workshop had disappeared. The smooth face has been polished by millions of hammer blows. Tiny imperfections remain around its edges, each one earned honestly through years of work. The horn curves gracefully outward, allowing iron to be bent into circles and gentle arcs. Nearby rests the hardy hole, ready to hold special cutting tools whenever they are needed. To someone unfamiliar with blacksmithing, it appears to be nothing more than a heavy block of iron. To the craftsman, it is the center of his working universe. Almost every object in the workshop is arranged around it, not through strict rules, through habit. Within easy reach hang dozens of hammers. Visitors are often surprised by how many different kinds exist. Most imagine a blacksmith owning only one. Reality is much more interesting. Heavy sledges for powerful shaping, lighter hammers for careful finishing, cross pine hammers, straight pine hammers, small riveting hammers, each carries subtle differences in weight and balance. The master rarely pauses to decide which one he needs. His hand simply reaches toward the correct tool, almost without conscious thought. Years of repetition have transformed searching into instinct. Beside the hammers hang rows of tongs, long, short, broad, narrow, curved, straight. Some grip flat bars, others hold square stock, still others are shaped for round iron. To an outsider, they appear nearly identical. To the blacksmith, confusing them would feel much like wearing the wrong pair of boots. The right tool makes difficult work manageable. The wrong tool makes simple work frustrating. Against another wall stand shelves filled with iron. Some bars are newly purchased, others began life as something entirely different. An old wagon fitting a broken hinge, the worn remains of a horseshoe. Nothing useful is discarded carelessly. Even twisted fragments possess future possibilities. One day they may become nails, the next week perhaps a hook, months later perhaps part of a gate latch. The forge is a place where endings quietly become beginnings. Near the doorway rests a chopping block scarred by years of use, not for wood, for hot iron. Here, larger pieces may be supported before moving to the anvil. Its surface bears dark marks, where glowing metal briefly rested. The wood has survived only because those moments were always short. Nearby stands the quenching trough. Most people imagine dramatic clouds of steam whenever hot metal touches water. Sometimes that happens. More often, the process is quieter. A gentle hiss, tiny bubbles racing across the surface, ripples spreading slowly outward. The trough itself is plain, made from wood bound with iron hoops, or occasionally carved from stone, depending on the region. Nothing about it suggests importance, yet it remains one of the workshop's most frequently used tools. Light enters the building unevenly. There are no broad glass windows flooding the room with sunshine. Glass remains expensive and is often small, thick, and imperfect. Instead, daylight slips through the open doorway, narrow window openings, and small gaps beneath the roof where smoke escapes. Throughout the day, sunlight moves gradually across the workshop floor. Morning illuminates one corner, afternoon another. The blacksmith barely notices. His attention belongs elsewhere. Dust dances constantly within those shafts of light, not ordinary household dust alone. Tiny flakes of iron, fine charcoal particles, ash, almost too light to settle. Together they drift lazily through the warm air, visible only when sunlight catches them. The floor beneath your feet feels firm, packed earth in many rural workshops, sometimes stone in wealthier towns, never polished, never perfectly level. Years of use have created shallow depressions where the blacksmith stands most often. Each step follows paths walked thousands of times before. Look upward. The roof tells its own story. Heavy oak beams support thick thatch or wooden shingles overhead. Many have turned nearly black after decades of smoke drifting gently upward. Spiderwebs cling to quieter corners where little movement disturbs them. Occasionally, a sparrow slips inside through an opening beneath the roof, pauses upon a beam for a moment, then flutters back into the daylight. Rain announces itself long before anyone steps outside. The first drops tapping softly against timber, a gentle patter spreading steadily overhead. During heavier storms, the sound becomes almost soothing inside. The fire continues, glowing as though nothing has changed. The forge possesses its own weather, its own seasons, its own steady rhythm. Along one wall sits a sturdy workbench. This is where quieter tasks happen, filing rough edges, repairing handles, inspecting damaged tools, measuring new work. Unlike the dramatic hammering at the anvil, these jobs require patience more than strength. The apprentice often spends long hours here, learning precision before power. Scattered across the bench lie small objects waiting their turn: loose nails, bent rivets, leather straps, bits of wire. Nothing appears especially valuable. Collectively, they represent tomorrow's work. Above the bench hang measuring rods and simple chalk marks recording common dimensions. A wheelwright may need wagon fittings of familiar sizes. A cooper often requests iron hoops matching standard barrels. Certain patterns become so common that they scarcely require thought anymore. Experience quietly replaces calculation. Near the forge itself, stacked carefully beneath cover, lies the charcoal. At first glance, it appears surprisingly light. Lift a basket, however, and its weight becomes immediately apparent. Producing charcoal demanded tremendous effort. Wood had first to be cut, then slowly burned under carefully controlled conditions with limited oxygen. The resulting fuel burned hotter and cleaner than raw timber, making it essential for serious ironwork. Every basket represented days of labor, performed by charcoal burners deep within nearby forests. The blacksmith understood its value well. Fuel was never wasted. Each shovelful entered the fire deliberately. As afternoon light softens, the workshop begins revealing quieter details, often overlooked during busy mornings. A wooden stool, worn smooth by years of use. A cup resting beside the workbench. A whetstone slowly turning beneath practiced hands. A small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, waiting for the briefest pause in work. Lunch is seldom elaborate. Bread, cheese, perhaps, onions, maybe a little cured meat, if fortunes have been kind. The meal is eaten without ceremony. Work resumes soon. Afterward, the forge waits for no one. Listen carefully, without customers speaking, without hammers striking. The workshop possesses its own music. The fire crackles softly as fresh charcoal settles into place. Leather bellows creak gently with each slow breath. Somewhere, water drips steadily into a bucket after yesterday's rain. A loose chain sways faintly whenever someone brushes past. Outside, distant sheep call across nearby fields. Inside, warmth wraps itself around every sound, softening the edges until even silence feels comfortably alive. It is easy to imagine that such a place might feel lonely. Surprisingly, it rarely does. The forge is almost always expecting someone. If not a customer, then the apprentice. If not the apprentice, then a neighbor stopping briefly with news. If no visitors arrive, there are still tools to maintain, orders to finish, charcoal to prepare, accounts to remember, and tomorrow's work to organize. The building is seldom truly empty, yet there are moments, usually near sunset. The final customer has departed, the apprentice has gone home, or, upstairs, the fire has been allowed to settle lower. Orange fades toward deep red. Shadows lengthen across the workshop floor. The blacksmith remains alone for just a little while. He gathers hammers, returns tongs to their pegs, brushes iron scale from the anvil, checks tomorrow's unfinished work. These final minutes are unhurried. The forge seems almost grateful for the quiet after another busy day. As the last customer disappears down the village lane and the final hammer blow echoes softly into the evening, the forge begins its slow transformation, not into silence, but into rest. The bright orange heart of the fire is no longer fed with fresh charcoal. The bellows stand motionless where they have worked faithfully since before sunrise. The anvil, which only moments ago rang beneath steady hammer strikes, now sits quietly beneath the fading light, its polished surface reflecting only the dying glow of the embers. The workshop exhales, after an entire day filled with movement, heat, and conversation. A welcome stillness settles over the room. The blacksmith does not simply walk away. The day's work always ends, much as it began, with careful routines. Tools return to their familiar places. Each hammer hangs upon its peg. The tongs are arranged neatly according to size. Chisels are wiped clean before rust has a chance to form. The workbench is cleared of loose iron filings and scattered scraps that might become tomorrow's raw material. Even after many years, these small habits remain important. Order today makes tomorrow easier. The forge rewards preparation, satisfied that everything is ready for another morning. The blacksmith gives the fire one final glance. The coals still glow softly beneath a blanket of ash. If carefully covered, enough warmth may survive the night to help awaken tomorrow's fire. Nothing is wasted if it can be preserved. Stepping outside feels almost surprising. After spending the entire day surrounded by heat, the evening air seems wonderfully cool. Even during midsummer, the breeze carries a freshness impossible to find beside the forge. The smell changes to no longer charcoal and iron, now damp earth. Fresh grass. Wood smoke drifting gently from household chimneys, the scent of supper being prepared somewhere nearby, perhaps onions slowly cooking in an iron pot, perhaps barley porridge thickening over the fire, perhaps fresh bread baked earlier that morning for the first time all day. The blacksmith breathes deeply without tasting smoke. The village itself is changing. Morning belongs to work, evening belongs to home. Children who spent the afternoon chasing one another between cottages now gather near their families. Farmers return from the fields with tired oxen moving slowly behind them. The shepherd leads sheep through familiar gates. The mill wheel beside the stream continues turning steadily, though more quietly now as fewer people bring grain to be ground. Somewhere, church bells ring once again, not calling people to labor, calling them toward the close of another ordinary day. The walk home is rarely long. In many villages, the blacksmith lives beside the workshop. Sometimes the family occupies rooms attached directly to the forge. In larger towns, the house may stand above the workshop itself. This arrangement is practical. The forge represents years of investment. Keeping it close offers both convenience and security. As the heavy wooden door opens, another world begins. It is smaller, quieter, warmer, in a different way. The fire burning here is not fierce enough to soften iron. It exists to cook, to warm, to gather people together. The contrast feels almost immediate. The forge demands attention. The home offers comfort. Inside, simple furniture fills the room. A sturdy wooden table, several benches, perhaps, one or two stools crafted by the village carpenter, shelves holding pottery bowls and wooden cups, hooks suspended from ceiling beams, where herbs dry slowly throughout the year, bundles of garlic, sprigs of thyme, mint, sage. The pleasant fragrance of dried plants mixes gently with the smell of the evening meal. Nothing appears luxurious. Everything appears useful. The blacksmith removes the heavy leather apron first. It hangs from a familiar peg near the doorway. its surface bears countless marks accumulated over many years, tiny burn holes, dark stains, smooth patches where hands have brushed against it thousands of times, like the forge itself. The apron tells a quiet story without speaking. Boots follow. Dust falls from them onto the floor. Small traces of charcoal cling stubbornly to clothing despite every effort to brush them away outside. No one in the household seems bothered. This is simply how a blacksmith returns home every evening, every season, year after year. Soon the family gathers around the table, contrary to the lavish feasts often shown in films. Everyday medieval meals are generally modest. Good food, certainly, but simple. Fresh bread rests near the center of the table. Its crust is thick and dark from the village oven. A pot of vegetable stew still steams gently, depending upon the season. It may contain onions, leeks, cabbage, beans, peas, carrots, or turnips. Perhaps a little bacon or salted pork adds flavor if supplies allow. On fortunate evenings, there may be cheese from a neighboring farm, sometimes eggs, occasionally river fish, fresh. Fruit appears only when the seasons are generous. Nothing is extravagant. Yet, after 12 hours beside the forge, even ordinary food tastes deeply satisfying. The first few moments of supper are often quiet, not because conversation is unwelcome, simply because hunger deserves attention. First, bread is broken, bowls are filled. Steam rises into the cool evening air, drifting through the open window. Gradually, conversation begins. The apprentice, if he lives with the family, may describe something learned that day. Perhaps he finally forged his first acceptable nail. Perhaps the master corrected the way he held the tongs. Perhaps a customer complimented his careful work while believing the master had made it. Such moments matter. Small successes encourage patience. The blacksmith listens carefully. He remembers his own apprenticeship well enough to recognize the mixture of pride and uncertainty. Learning a trade is never finished, not even after 40 years. Children ask questions. One wonders why horses require shoes while cows do not. Another wants to know whether iron is found already shaped beneath the earth. A younger child is simply fascinated by the sparks that fly through the workshop. The blacksmith answers patiently, not with long lectures, only enough to satisfy curiosity. Before tomorrow brings another opportunity to learn. Education within medieval households often happened this way. Knowledge passed naturally through conversation rather than formal lessons. The blacksmith's wife contributes just as much to the household's success. Though history has not always remembered her role as clearly, she may manage household accounts, purchase food at market, care for children, maintain clothing, prepare meals, welcome customers when the blacksmith is occupied. In many workshops across medieval Europe, wives also assisted directly with the family business. They greeted visitors, handled simple transactions, kept records where literacy allowed, helped apprentices. Sometimes they even continued operating workshops after a husband's death until a son or new master took over. The forge was rarely sustained by one person alone. It was often a family enterprise. After supper, no one rushes immediately to sleep. There are still small tasks to finish. A torn sleeve requires mending. Bootlaces need replacing. Tomorrow's bread dough is prepared. Wood is brought inside before night dew settles upon it. The blacksmith may sharpen a household knife by the quieter light of the hearth rather than the roaring forge, without the pressure of waiting customers. These moments feel almost peaceful. Outside, darkness spreads steadily across the village. Windows glow softly with candlelight. The sounds of work gradually disappear. Dogs bark occasionally somewhere beyond the fields. An owl calls from nearby woodland. The steady chorus of insects grows louder beneath the evening sky. Inside, conversation becomes slower. Stories replace practical matters. Perhaps an elderly relative recalls a particularly harsh winter many years before. Perhaps news from a neighboring village is discussed. A traveler reportedly passed through with unusual tales from distant towns. No one can be entirely certain how much of the story is true. That hardly matters. The telling itself is enjoyable. Sometimes the blacksmith simply sits quietly. The day's labor lingers pleasantly in tired muscles. His hands rest upon the table. Broad hands, scarred hands, hands that have shaped thousands upon thousands of useful objects. Now they cradle a warm wooden cup instead of a hammer. The contrast is welcome. One cannot help noticing those hands. Even in the gentle firelight, they reveal decades of honest work. The fingertips are thickened, the knuckles slightly enlarged. Tiny pale scars cross the skin in every direction. No two blacksmiths possess identical hands. Yet all share certain familiar marks left behind by the forge. They are not signs of suffering alone. They are signs of experience. As the evening grows later, preparations for sleep begin. Candles are trimmed to preserve precious wax. The hearth fire is reduced carefully rather than allowed to burn wastefully through the night. Doors are checked. Animals receive one final glance. Tomorrow will arrive early, very early. Bedrooms in medieval homes are often simpler than modern ones. A wooden bed frame, if the family is prosperous enough. Straw-filled mattresses covered with linen sheets. Wool blankets during colder months. Perhaps feather bedding for wealthier households, though this remains uncommon in many villages. Privacy, as we understand it today, is limited. Family members often sleep in the same room or in adjoining spaces, separated only by curtains. The blacksmith lowers himself carefully onto the bed. Only now, in complete stillness, does he truly notice the weight of the day. His shoulders ache faintly. His forearms feel pleasantly heavy. The warmth of the forge seems to linger beneath the skin, despite the cool night air outside. Soon those familiar sensations begin fading. Tomorrow's work briefly crosses his mind. The farmer's broken plow, the cooper's barrel hoops. Winter arrives quietly. There is no single morning when the village wakes and declares that the season has changed. Instead, the transformation happens little by little. The evenings grow darker sooner. The mornings remain cold a little longer. Leaves disappear from the hedgerows. The rich greens of summer slowly surrender to muted browns and pale grays. The blacksmith notices these changes long before most people do, not because he watches the calendar, but because his work changes with the weather. One frosty morning, long before sunrise, the village lies beneath a thin blanket of snow. It is not deep enough to stop daily life, but enough to soften every familiar shape. The rooftops wear white caps, fence posts become rounded, the narrow lane leading to the forge has almost disappeared beneath fresh powder, broken only by the delicate tracks of rabbits and the cautious footprints of an early rising farmer. The world feels quieter. Snow has a remarkable way of absorbing sound. Even the church bell, when it eventually rings, seems softer than usual. The blacksmith steps outside and draws a slow breath. The cold air fills his lungs with a sharp freshness, unlike any other season. His beard, if he wears one, gathers tiny crystals of frost almost immediately. The water bucket left outside overnight wears a thin sheet of ice before the forge can be awakened. That ice must first be broken. A few careful strikes with the back of an axe handle send delicate cracks racing across the frozen surface. The sound echoes briefly through the still morning, then silence returns. Inside the workshop, yesterday's ashes wait exactly where they were left. The forge is cold, not simply cool, cold enough that even the iron tools seem to have withdrawn into themselves. The anvil, always solid beneath the hand, now feels almost painfully cold to the touch. The hammers seem heavier, the tongs colder. Every surface reminds the blacksmith that winter has arrived. The first task of the day becomes more important than ever: building the fire during warmer months. Yesterday's hidden embers often survive beneath layers of ashdot in the coldest weeks of winter. Those precious remnants sometimes disappear completely. The fire must begin again from nothing. Dry kindling is carefully arranged. Not just any wood will do. Moist timber produces too much smoke and too little heat. The blacksmith has learned over many winters which pieces split cleanly and burn steadily. Small curls of wood shavings are tucked beneath the sticks. A spark catches. For a few moments, the flame remains uncertain. Then it grows stronger. Another piece of kindling, another handful of charcoal. The bellows begin their familiar rhythm. Draw, dot, push, dot, push, dot, push, dot, push, dot. Each breath feeds life into the growing fire. Slowly warmth returns to the workshop. It does not happen all at once. The corners remain cold for some time. Only the space nearest the forge begins to feel comfortable. The apprentice arrives wrapped in a heavy wool cloak. His boots leave small patches of melting snow across the packed earth floor. He rubs his hands together before reaching toward the growing warmth of the fire. The master smiles slightly. Every apprentice learns the same lesson. The forge is generous, but only after patience. Outside, the village is changing as well. Farmers still work, though the nature of their labor has shifted. Fields that demanded endless attention during spring and summer now rest beneath frost. Animals require greater care. Firewood must be gathered and protected from dampness. Roofs inspected after heavy snow. Tools repaired before next year's planting begins. Winter may appear quieter than harvest season. In truth, it simply asks for different kinds of work. For the blacksmith, winter often becomes the season of repairs. The frantic urgency of harvest has passed. Now farmers finally have time to bring damaged equipment that was hastily patched during the busy months. Plowshares worn thin after autumn tilling. Axes chipped from cutting firewood. Sickles carefully cleaned and sharpened before being stored away. It is a season of preparation. Spring always returns. Wise villagers prepare long before it arrives. The workshop begins filling with tools waiting for renewal. Each one tells a story of the year just past. A nick in an axe blade from striking hidden stone, a bent shovel from stubborn frozen ground, a cracked iron ring from a wagon that carried too many loads. The blacksmith studies each piece quietly. Winter rewards careful work. There is finally enough time to give every repair the attention it deserves. Some days, the forge becomes almost crowded, not because of urgent emergencies, because people seek warmth. Neighbors stop by carrying small repairs that might easily have waited: an old lantern hook, a loose latch, a broken kitchen knife. The work itself may take only minutes. The conversation often lasts longer. The forge has become one of the warmest places in the village. Visitors linger, hands stretch toward the fire. Stories are exchanged while iron slowly heats outside. Snowflakes drift gently past the open doorway inside. Glowing charcoal paints everyone's faces with soft amber light. Children especially enjoy these visits. The journey to the forge becomes an adventure. They stamp snow from their boots before stepping inside. The sudden warmth reddens their cheeks. Wide eyes watch sparks rise from the anvil, while tiny drops of melted snow fall quietly onto the floor beneath them. Sometimes they sit silently upon a wooden bench, perfectly content simply to watch the master work. Winter has a way of slowing everyone. Even conversations become gentler without long daylight hours, pressing people toward endless tasks. There is room for reflection. The blacksmith hears stories from neighboring villages. News carried by travelers, delayed by poor roads, reports of frozen rivers. Early snow in distant hills, the occasional wolf spotted near woodland paths. Most stories end with someone drawing a little closer to the warmth of the forge. No one seems eager to step back into the cold. The fire becomes almost hypnotic. Fresh charcoal settles with a quiet crackle. Orange embers shift beneath thin layers of white ash. Every so often, a small burst of sparks rises briefly before fading into the shadows above. The apprentice learns another important lesson during winter: managing temperature. Iron cools much faster in freezing air. The distance between the forge and the anvil suddenly matters far more than during summer. Movements must become slightly quicker, not rushed, simply efficient. The glowing metal loses precious heat with every passing second. Experience teaches exactly how much time remains before another trip back into the fire becomes necessary. The blacksmith adjusts almost without thinking. Years of winter work have trained his instincts. Outside, the days seem remarkably short. Morning arrives reluctantly. Evening returns early. By late afternoon, the sunlight entering through the workshop door has already begun to fade. Candles appear sooner. The forge itself becomes the brightest light in the room. Its glow dances across timber beams blackened by decades of smoke. The workshop feels smaller, cozier, almost enclosed within its circle of warmth. Sometimes, snow falls steadily for hours. The world beyond the doorway gradually disappears. Beneath a curtain of white. Customers become fewer. Those who do arrive often carry stories of difficult journeys: wagons trapped in deep drifts, frozen streams crossed with great care, horses moving cautiously over hidden ice. The blacksmith listens while continuing his work. Winter teaches everyone patience. Nature sets the pace. there is little sense arguing with it. As evening approaches, another practical concern appears. Fuel. Keeping the forge burning through winter consumes enormous quantities of charcoal. The blacksmith watches his supplies carefully. Every basket represents hard work performed months earlier by charcoal burners deep within the forest, delivering that fuel before heavy snow becomes essential. Running short during the coldest weeks would make work nearly impossible. Nothing is wasted. The fire is fed carefully, only what is needed, no more, no less, at home. Winter evenings carry their own familiar comforts. The family gathers closer around the hearth. Wool blankets appear more often. Stews simmer longer, growing rich with beans, onions, barley, and whatever preserved meat remains from autumn. Fresh bread warms beside the fire. Perhaps apples stored carefully since harvest still fill a woven basket nearby. The meal feels heartier than summer fare. The body asks for warmth from within as well as without. Outside, darkness arrives long before anyone feels ready for sleep. Candles flicker softly against the walls. The wind occasionally whistles. Beneath the eaves, snow slides quietly from the roof. The blacksmith sits with tired hands, wrapped around a warm wooden cup. His muscles still remember the heat of the forge. His face still carries traces of the day's warmth, yet beyond the windows. Winter rules the village completely. It is a season of contrasts. Cold roads, warm workshops, frozen mornings, glowing fires, silent fields, busy repair, benches, everything feels slower, more deliberate. There is a certain peace in that rhythm. The forge itself seems almost grateful for winter, not because the work becomes easier. In many ways it becomes more demanding, but because the season reminds everyone why the workshop exists. It is not merely a place where iron is shaped. It is a place where preparation happens, where broken things receive another chance, where neighbors gather, where stories are shared, where warmth is offered freely to anyone stepping through the open door. When spring eventually returns, and it always does, the village will be ready. Plows sharpened, axes repaired, horses reshod, cartwheels tightened, tools restored. The fields will awaken because much of winter's quiet work happened here, beside this patient fire. And as the blacksmith lowers the bellows one final time,
there is one morning each week that feels slightly different from all the others. The village awakens earlier, not because the sun rises sooner, but because people do. Before dawn has fully broken, faint lantern lights begin moving quietly along the roads leading toward the marketplace. Farmers' guide wagons laden with vegetables and grain. Shepherds encourage reluctant sheep along muddy paths. Merchants arrive from neighboring towns with carts filled carefully the evening before. Even the birds seem to notice that something unusual is happening. The village is preparing for market day. For the blacksmith, market day is both familiar and unpredictable. Some weeks pass calmly. Others become among the busiest days of the entire season. Unlike harvest or planting, which follow nature's calendar, market day follows the steady rhythm of community life. It is when people gather, and wherever people gather, something eventually needs repairing. Long before the first customers appear, the forge is already awake. The morning begins just as it always does. The previous night's embers are uncovered. Fresh charcoal settles into the hearth. The bellows breathe life into the growing fire. The anvil waits patiently beneath the first light creeping through the workshop doorway. Yet there is a quiet sense of anticipation. The blacksmith knows that today the village will come to him instead of the other way around. Outside, the road grows steadily busier. A pair of oxen pull a wagon piled high with sacks of barley. Behind them walks a young boy carrying several baskets of eggs, taking careful steps to avoid the deepest patches of mud. Two women balance woven baskets filled with onions, herbs, and fresh cheese. A cooper rolls an empty barrel toward the market square, hoping to return with orders for several more. A traveling merchant whistles softly while guiding 3 pack horses carrying bolts of cloth wrapped carefully against the morning dew. Everyone moves with quiet purpose. Market day is not merely an opportunity to buy and sell. It is a chance to see neighbors, exchange news, arrange future work, hear stories from distant villages. For many people, it is the busiest social occasion of the week. As the sun climbs higher, the marketplace slowly transforms. Simple wooden stalls unfold beneath canvas awnings. Blankets spread across the ground become displays for pottery, woven cloth, wooden bowls, candles, herbs, and baskets. The air fills with a remarkable mixture of scents: fresh bread, wood smoke, new-cut timber, dried fish, apples, leather, wool, and, drifting from the forge, the unmistakable smell of charcoal and hot iron. The blacksmith rarely leaves his workshop for long. He does not need to. The market comes to him. The first customer arrives carrying a bundle of kitchen knives wrapped carefully inside cloth. The woman smiles apologetically. "They're all dull," she admits. The blacksmith nods. It happens every market season. Families often wait until market day to bring several small repairs together. One journey solves many problems. The knives are placed neatly beside the workbench. By afternoon, they will be sharp once again. Moments later, another visitor appears, a farmer from a neighboring village. His face is familiar, though they have met only a handful of times. He has traveled nearly 2 hours with a broken plowshare balanced across his cart. There may be another blacksmith closer to home. Or perhaps this craftsman's reputation has spread beyond the village boundaries. Reputation travels surprisingly quickly in the medieval world. Good work earns returning customers. Poor work earns quiet warnings shared from neighbor to neighbor. The blacksmith studies the damaged plow. A long crack runs across one edge. Repair is possible. The farmer exhales with obvious relief. Buying a new plowshare would cost considerably more than restoring the old one. Nearby, the apprentice has begun sharpening the kitchen knives upon a whetstone. The slow scraping sound blends gently with the crackling forge. Neither task is hurried. Market day may be busy, but careful work remains more important than fast work. As the morning continues, the workshop becomes wonderfully varied. A wheelwright stops by to collect several iron tires forged earlier in the week. A tailor requests sturdy shears sharpened before winter cloth cutting begins. A fisherman asks for replacement hooks. A baker needs an iron peel repaired after years of daily use inside the oven. Each trade touches another. Each visitor reminds the blacksmith how deeply connected village life truly is. Sometimes the forge serves another purpose entirely. It becomes a place of demonstration. Children gather quietly near the doorway whenever glowing iron appears upon the anvil. Their eyes widen as dull, gray metal slowly turns orange inside the fire. The apprentice smiles. He remembers standing exactly where they now stand. One little boy asks whether the iron feels soft while glowing. His father chuckles gently. The blacksmith simply nods. "Soft enough," he replies. The answer satisfies everyone. No lengthy explanation is needed. The hammer soon speaks for itself. A series of steady blows begins shaping a simple hook. Nothing elaborate, nothing expensive. Yet to the children, it seems almost magical. A useful object appears where moments before there was only an ordinary bar of iron. Tiny sparks dance briefly through the air. They disappear before reaching the ground. The children laugh softly, then hurry away toward another curiosity waiting in the marketplace. Not all visitors come to buy. Some come simply to talk. An elderly shepherd leans comfortably against the workshop doorway while warming his hands beside the forge. He has no repairs today, only news. There comes a moment in every blacksmith's life when strength is no longer the most valuable thing he possesses. It is not the power to swing a heavy hammer, nor the endurance to stand beside the forge from dawn until dusk. Instead, it is something much quieter: trust. By the time a blacksmith has spent 20 or 30 years serving the same community, his reputation begins to travel farther than he ever does. People recommend him to neighbors. Travelers remember his workshop. Merchants speak of his honesty while visiting distant markets. A farmer repairing a broken plow might say, "Go to the smith in that village. He'll make it right." Such words cannot be bought. They are earned one careful repair at a time. In the medieval world, reputation was often a craftsman's greatest possession. Coins could be stolen. Buildings could burn. Tools might wear out. But a respected name could support an entire family for generations. That is why the blacksmith guarded it so carefully. For many craftsmen living in towns and growing cities, another institution also shaped their working lives: the guild. Today, the word may sound unfamiliar, but in medieval Europe, guilds were among the most important organizations in urban society. Not every village possessed one. Small rural communities often relied simply upon local custom and personal trust. Larger towns, however, frequently organized craftsmen into guilds devoted to particular trades. There were guilds for carpenters, for masons, for weavers, for goldsmiths, and in many places for blacksmiths and other workers skilled in iron. It is worth remembering that guilds were not identical everywhere. Practices varied from one region to another and changed over the centuries. Some towns maintained highly organized associations with detailed written rules, while others relied upon looser traditions among local craftsmen. The medieval world was wonderfully diverse. There was rarely one single way of doing things. Yet despite those differences, many guilds shared common goals. They protected standards of workmanship. They trained apprentices. They helped settle disputes. They cared for members during illness or hardship. They sometimes supported widows and children after a craftsman's death. A guild was more than a professional association. It was, in many ways, an extended family built around a shared trade. Imagine arriving in a bustling medieval town for the first time. Unlike the quiet village forge we have come to know, this town hums with constant activity. Stone buildings stand shoulder to shoulder along narrow streets. Church towers rise above tiled rooftops. The marketplace stretches across a broad square filled with merchants from many different regions. Somewhere within this busy maze of streets lies the smith's quarter. The sound reaches you before the buildings themselves. Not one hammer, many. Different rhythms overlapping one another. Some rapid, some slow, some distant, some close enough that each strike seems to vibrate gently through the cobbled street beneath your feet. Several workshops may stand side by side. Each belongs to a different master. Each competes quietly for customers. Yet each also belongs to the same wider community of craftsmen. Here, reputation becomes even more important than in a village. Customers have choices. If one blacksmith consistently produces poor work, another workshop stands only a few streets away. Quality matters. Honesty matters. Reliability matters. The guild helps preserve all three. The path toward becoming a master blacksmith remains long. An apprentice spends years learning the fundamentals. Eventually, many become journeymen. The word comes from the French journée, meaning day, reflecting workers who earned wages by the day while continuing to improve their skills. Journeymen often traveled between towns, working under different masters. Each workshop taught something slightly different. One master excelled at horseshoes. Another specialized in locks. A third became known for exceptionally fine tools. By moving from place to place, young craftsmen gathered knowledge much as merchants gathered goods. Every journey broadened their understanding. Every new forge revealed another way of solving familiar problems. Only after years of experience might a journeyman seek recognition as a master. This was not granted lightly. In many guilds, the aspiring craftsman needed to demonstrate skill through a carefully judged piece of work. Historians often refer to this as a masterpiece. Today we use that word to describe any remarkable achievement. Originally, however, it often referred quite literally to the piece presented before guild members as proof that a craftsman deserved the title of master. The exact requirements varied greatly. One town might require a finely made lock, another several tools, another a complicated iron fitting. Whatever the task, the principle remained the same. Skill had to be demonstrated, not claimed. The guild members examined the work carefully. Were the joints clean? Did moving parts operate smoothly? Was the iron sound? Had the work been completed honestly? Only then might the new master earn permission to establish his own workshop. It was a moment of quiet pride, not because the journey had ended, because a new one had begun. With independence came responsibility. The master's name now stood behind every object leaving the forge. If a farmer praised a well-made plowshare, the master's reputation grew. If a poorly fitted horseshoe injured an animal, word spread just as quickly. Medieval communities possessed remarkable memories, especially when discussing quality. There were no printed advertisements, no painted billboards, no glowing shop signs promising excellence. Instead, business depended upon conversation. One satisfied customer spoke to another. One disappointed customer did the same. The difference between the two could shape an entire career. Consider something as simple as a kitchen knife. If it held its edge well for many months, its owner naturally remembered where it had been purchased. When neighbors admired it, the answer came easily. The blacksmith near the eastern gate made it. That single recommendation might lead several more customers to the workshop. No money changed hands for the advertisement. Trust itself became the advertisement. The opposite was equally true. Imagine a wagon wheel repaired carelessly. The iron tire loosens after only a few journeys. The wagon tips unexpectedly along a rough road. Fortunately, no one is injured. Even so, the driver remembers. Every blacksmith remembers the first piece of iron he ever shaped. It may not have been beautiful. It may not even have been especially useful. Perhaps it was only a simple nail, a rough hook, a bent strip of iron that required far more hammer blows than necessary. Yet it marked the beginning of something. A journey measured not in miles, but in mornings. Thousands of them. Now, many decades have passed. The young apprentice who once struggled to lift the bellows has become the master, standing quietly beside the same familiar anvil. The forge has changed a little over the years. A new workbench replaced an older one after countless repairs. Several hammers have worn smooth with use. The roof has been patched more than once after winter storms. A larger quenching trough now stands where a smaller barrel once served. But the heart of the workshop remains wonderfully familiar. The fire still glows. The anvil still waits. The smell of charcoal still greets every morning. Some things, it seems, resist the passing of time. The blacksmith himself, however, has changed. His hair, once dark with youth, now carries threads of silver. His beard has grown fuller. The deep lines around his eyes speak not only of age, but of countless years spent looking into bright fires and laughing with neighbors. His shoulders remain broad. His hands remain strong. Yet strength now reveals itself differently. He no longer lifts the heaviest iron quite so easily. He pauses more often between demanding tasks. Not because he has forgotten the work, because he has learned there is little value in unnecessary haste. The apprentice notices these small changes, not with sadness, simply with understanding. One day, the same changes will come to him. That is the quiet promise carried by every trade passed from one generation to the next. On this particular morning, the forge awakens as it always has. Fresh charcoal settles gently over yesterday's hidden embers. The bellows begin their slow breathing. Outside, the village stretches itself awake beneath another pale dawn. Nothing appears unusual, yet the master knows something the apprentice does not fully understand. Every ordinary morning becomes precious once enough years have passed. When we are young, we imagine there will always be another sunrise, another season, another harvest. Age teaches a gentler lesson. Every familiar routine is also a gift. The first customer arrives, carrying an axe that has belonged to his family for many years. The handle has already been replaced twice. The iron head bears small marks from countless seasons spent cutting timber. The farmer smiles warmly. I thought perhaps it deserved another sharpening. The blacksmith nods. So do I. Neither man speaks of age directly. There's no need. Both understand that useful things often survive because someone cared for them patiently over many years. The same is true of people. As the axe warms within the forge, the blacksmith notices his apprentice watching closely. Not because the repair is difficult, because the apprentice has begun studying something else. The master's judgment. He notices how little the older man wastes movement, how rarely he strikes the iron without purpose, how every action seems calm, economical, and quietly confident. Youth often believes mastery comes from strength. Experience knows it comes from understanding. The apprentice has grown considerably since first entering the workshop years ago. His shoulders have broadened. His hands bear their own collection of small scars and polished calluses. He no longer asks where each tool belongs. His feet already know where to stand. His hands already know which hammer to reach for. Many mornings, the master simply watches, not because instruction has ended, because observation itself has become another lesson. Teaching gradually changes. In the beginning, every mistake required correction. Now, silence often teaches more than words. Late one afternoon, while waiting for fresh iron to reach the proper heat, the apprentice asks a question. Master, the older man looks up from the fire. How do you know when the iron is ready? The question brings a gentle smile. Years earlier, he might have answered with temperatures or colors. Now his reply is different. You stop asking the fire to tell you. The apprentice looks puzzled. The master continues. One day, you'll simply know. It is not a mysterious answer. It is an honest one. Some knowledge cannot be transferred through explanation alone. It settles quietly inside a craftsman after years of patient work, like recognizing a friend's footsteps before seeing them, or predicting rain from the smell of the wind. The forge teaches slowly. Outside, the village has changed as well. Children who once stood in the doorway watching sparks now arrive, carrying their own broken tools. The young carpenter has become a respected builder. The shepherd's son now owns the flock. The miller's daughter manages her family's accounts with remarkable skill. Time moves gently through the village, replacing one generation with another without ever seeming hurried. The blacksmith notices these changes more than most. His workshop has welcomed them all. He remembers repairing the first toy wagon for a little boy who now arrives with wagons of his own. He recalls fitting tiny hinges to a chest prepared as part of a young woman's wedding gifts. Years later, he repaired that same chest after it had traveled across half the countryside. The forge quietly records the passage of human lives through the objects people bring. Some mornings, travelers still arrive from distant villages. One pauses before the doorway. I've heard your work is worth the journey. The master thanks him politely. Inside, however, he smiles for another reason. He remembers when people said exactly the same about the blacksmith who taught him. Reputation, like a well-tended fire, passes from one pair of hands to another. The older blacksmith increasingly allows the apprentice to greet customers first, to inspect damaged tools, to discuss repairs, to make decisions independently. The apprentice still seeks advice occasionally, far less often than before. The transition happens gradually, almost unnoticed. One day, the customers begin asking the apprentice directly instead of waiting for the master. Not because respect has diminished, because confidence has grown. The forge itself accepts the change naturally. The fire does not care whose hands feed a charcoal. The anvil rings the same beneath every careful hammer. Birdsong returns before sunrise. The forge continues exactly as it always has. Horses need shoes. Plows need sharpening. Doors need hinges. Life continues. One morning, however, the master does something he has never done before. He hands the apprentice the workshop ledger. The records, the orders, the responsibility. No ceremony marks the occasion. Only trust. The apprentice accepts quietly. His hands hesitate for just a moment. The ledger feels surprisingly heavy, not because of parchment, because of everything it represents. Outside, another customer approaches carrying a broken gate latch. The apprentice rises to greet him. The master remains seated, listening, watching. The conversation unfolds naturally. Questions are answered confidently. The repair is accepted. The customer smiles. Nothing seems unusual, and that is precisely why the older man feels content. The forge no longer depends entirely upon him. It will continue, long after his own hands have grown too tired to lift the hammer each morning. That realization brings not sadness, but peace, because this has always been the purpose of apprenticeship. Not merely teaching someone to shape iron, teaching someone to continue the work. Years later, perhaps after the master has finally laid down his hammer for the last time, travelers still stop beside the familiar workshop. The apprentice, now a master himself, welcomes them through the same doorway. The fire glows where it always has. The anvil still carries its polished face. Some of the old hammers remain in use. One bears the smooth wooden handle worn by 2 generations of craftsmen. Occasionally, an elderly villager points toward it and smiles. That was the old master's favorite. The younger blacksmith smiles in return. I know, the story continues. Not because buildings last forever, not because iron never wears away, but because knowledge, patiently shared, outlives the hands that first carried it. Centuries pass. The forge eventually falls silent. The roof disappears. Timbers return to the earth. Only scattered fragments remain beneath layers of soil. A broken horseshoe, a handful of nails, small pieces of slag left behind beside the hearth. A worn anvil may be carried elsewhere or buried beneath the ruins. Long afterward, archaeologists gently uncover these forgotten traces. They study charcoal preserved beneath collapsed walls. They examine hammer scale no larger than grains of sand. They reconstruct the shape of workshops from stains left in the ground where wooden posts once stood. Each discovery tells a remarkably ordinary story, not of kings, not of battles, but of mornings spent lighting the fire, of neighbors waiting patiently with broken tools, of apprentices learning where each hammer belonged, of families sharing simple meals after long days of honest work. The blacksmith's name may be forgotten. His face long vanished from memory, yet his work still speaks. Every nail that held a roof together, every plow that fed a family, every horseshoe that carried a traveler safely home. These quiet achievements shaped history just as surely as the deeds of rulers whose names fill great chronicles. Perhaps even more so, because civilizations are built not only by extraordinary people, they're sustained by ordinary ones. And as our own journey through this medieval forge comes gently to an end, the final embers settle beneath a blanket of soft gray ash. The bellows grow still. The hammer rests upon the workbench. Outside, evening settles peacefully across the village. The roads grow quiet. The fields darken beneath the fading sky. Somewhere nearby, a church bell marks the close of another ordinary day. Tomorrow, before the first light reaches the rooftops, another blacksmith will awaken the fire. Another apprentice will sweep the floor. Another customer will arrive, carrying something broken. The rhythm will continue, just as it did for centuries. And now, as the warmth of the forge slowly fades into the cool stillness of the night, you can leave this little workshop behind, knowing that its story was never really about iron. It was about patience, about quiet craftsmanship, about communities built one careful repair at a time, and about the countless ordinary lives that, together, shaped the medieval world far more than history often remembers. The fire grows dimmer. The village grows quieter. The stars appear one by one above the sleeping rooftops. And at last, the forge rests,